Hey everyone, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, my name is Alex. I'm super excited for today's video because I've actually done quite a lot of research to understand it in my own training and my coaching, and I decided to share some of it with you. So I'm going to talk about why some people can't get into their middle splits even though they stretch for a very long time, and why some people need to work for literally ages to be able to do this particular split. And at the end, I'm also going to give you 2 tips, cheats of how you can get deeper into your split in no time. So it's gonna literally take a few seconds and you will feel that you're deeper in your middle split. However, I recommend not skipping to that part and watching the whole video, just because I'm going to be talking about the anatomy of your body, and that's going to help you understand how the 2 tips I'm going to give you at the end work. So let's get started and let's get a little bit smarter when it comes to our stretching. So the 3 things I'm going to talk about first before I give you the tips is the muscle tightness and muscle length, ligament length and ligament mobility. And at the end, I'm going to talk about bone structure and the anatomy of our hips and our femurs. So the first point is muscles. And obviously, when you want to get flexible, you need to stretch your muscles. Otherwise, we cannot get into our splits. However, we're all born with different ability for flexibility in our muscles. So some people are born with muscles that are more able to stretch, and some people are born with muscles that are less able to stretch. And there's a long explanation to that. However, there's no reason why either of those 2 should not get their splits. The only thing is that you need to put in the work, and one person will probably need to work a little bit less while the other person will need to work a little bit more. However, you both will get to your splits if we're looking only at the muscle tightness. There are, however, a few factors that affect the tightness of your muscles. If you're stretching for your splits or your back bends or anything else, it is important to understand that if you're lifting a lot of heavy weights, it is going to slow down your progress. So if you want to progress faster at your splits, you should probably not be lifting a lot of heavy weight. You should definitely still be doing your strength training routines, but maybe not lift a lot. Which means that the tightness of your muscles is not a factor that is limiting you when it comes to middle splits if you just put in the work. Second point is ligament length and mobility. So a ligament is the connective tissue that connects 2 bones to each other. So when it comes to your middle splits, we're going to be looking at the hip mobility. So we're going to be talking about the ligaments that connect your hips and your femur. And some people are actually born with longer ligaments than others. So if you have longer ligaments, you have more mobility in your joint. And the thing with our joints is that our joints always fight between 2 components. So we always want to have a component of mobility in our joints and a component of stability. And the more mobility, the less stability, and the more stability, the less mobility. So people that are born with longer ligaments will actually be able to achieve many flexibility poses faster than people that are born with shorter ligaments. However, having longer ligaments is not really something you can choose to have or not. Most of the time, if you have longer ligaments, you will be able to achieve flexibility faster, but you will most likely also have more unstable joints, which will probably lead to more injuries in your life when it comes to your joints. There's actually a test you can do at home to check if you have hypermobile joint, and you can see it on the screen now. So if you like, you can pause this video and do this test, and if you get more than 4 out of 9, it means that you are hypermobile. And this is of course not the test of your life, and it doesn't mean that this is what you are. This is just a simple test you can do at home. So if you're hypermobile, you will most likely find it easier to get to your middle splits, and if you're not, it might be a very limiting factor. It is also good to understand that your ligaments can be stretched, so they can be stretched over time. So like you see here, when you look at my leg here, you can actually see that my knee is a little bit bent, and this is as straight as my leg can go. And the reason for it is because the ligaments in my knees are quite tight. And if I, for example, stretched from childhood, I could actually stretch this. So I could actually make my legs straighter. And this is something I still can do now. However, I choose not to stretch them too much. I stretch them a little bit. The more mobility I get in my knees, the less stability I will have. And this will most likely bring on more injuries later on in my life. So I'm not saying you should not be stretching your joints. I think you definitely should, but just be careful and be aware of where this might take you. One last fun fact I would like to share with you before we move on to the last point is that if you're a girl and you have your menstrual cycle, you might actually notice that you are a little bit more flexible during that time. And that's because of the estrogen receptors in our connective tissue that allows for a little bit more mobility during that time because of the hormones that are being produced in our bodies. I have also attached a whole study. You can read about it in the description if you would like to know more about that. So we're on the third and last part of the anatomy part of this video, and I'm going to talk about bone structure. And this is also the most limiting factor when it comes to your middle splits. And of course, we don't really know the exact anatomy of our hips unless we get a scan and can look at how it looks. But there are some things you definitely will be able to feel, like you might feel tension in here when you stretch, because your bones, your femur is the bone in your thigh, meets your hips, or you might feel pinching on the outside here. And this is just an indication of you having a bone structure that is probably not the easiest to work with when it comes to middle splits. So as you can see, our hips, they consist of a few parts. And before our hips are actually fused together and it's all bone, some parts of it are actually made of cartilage. So this is why when you are a child, it is actually easier for us to get into our middle splits because we have more movement in our hips. And if we keep on doing middle splits through our childhood, our hips will actually grow in a way that allows us to do middle splits in a much easier way than if we start as an adult. However, if we start as an adult, there's also a few factors that affect our middle splits. So here you can see two pictures of two different hip bones, and one of them will have more ability for middle splits and one of them will have less ability for middle splits. It is a little bit hard to say which one will have more ability for middle splits in this situation, just because we can't see how the femur looks. So we can't see how the bone that goes into that socket where you can see here, we can't see how it looks. So it's a little bit difficult to say whether this hip or the other hip is going to be more able to do middle splits. Here you can see another two pictures of hips, and it's the same here. One of them will have less restrictions depending on how the femur looks. And the next thing we're going to talk about is the femur. So it's the bone you can see here. So it is the bone you have in your thigh. So you can see that length of the neck varies, and most of the time, depending also on how your hips look, a longer head will make it a little bit easier to get into your middle splits than a short head. You can see another picture here, and this is the angle of the femur head. And most of the time, an angle that points more upwards will also make it a little bit easier to get into your middle splits, also depending on how your hips look. In general, the more shallow your hip socket is, the more ability for flexibility you have. And the deeper your hip socket is, then less ability for flexibility. Just because our femur goes into the socket, and if the socket is quite shallow, we can actually move it quite a lot in all angles. If our socket is very deep, it's going to be gripping well around our femur, and this allows for less mobility. And again, as we talked before, if you have more mobility, you have less stability, and if you have more stability, you have less mobility. So below I have also attached the link to the article where I found all the pictures. So what does all this really mean to you? All it means is that your muscles are most likely not the limiting factor for your flexibility. Your joints, they might be if your ligaments are short and tight. And the last thing is, in some people, you'll actually have a structure in your hips that will probably never allow you to get into a full middle split, which is fine, because now I'm going to give you 2 tips to how you can cheat your way into a middle split. I think it looks as good as it gets. This is how far I get into my middle split because my hips actually don't allow me to do middle splits in the right alignment. So I'm going to give you tips to how I get my splits flat without actually splitting in the exact correct alignment that some flexibility teachers teach you. Here are my middle splits, and of course you have to have a lot of flexibility to be able to be in this position, but there are 2 tips that I can give you to make it a little bit easier and a little bit more comfortable to stretch. So the first thing is, you can see it better from the side, so I'm going to do my splits from the side here. So a perfect middle split, I would want to be in the very middle of my legs, pushing my hips down to the ground. There are 2 ways I can make this easier here. So I can either arch, so regardless if you're not this far down into your split, if you're like, let's say up here, you can be arching, and if you arch, you will be able to actually slide a little bit further down. So it's the same for me. If I round my back, I'm not able to get as deep as if I arch my back. So if I arch my back, I'm actually able to sit all the way down. And this works wherever you are in your split. So if you're not all the way down, if you're a little bit higher up, it's going to work for you as well. Another tip is actually the opposite of that. So instead of me arching my back, I'm going to be rounding, but as I round, I need to sit my bum back. So I round and sit my bum back. So what this does is that it takes a little bit of tension from the front and puts it a little bit more into our hamstrings. So it's a little bit like doing a super wide pancake. And this also allows for some people to actually be able to do something that's very close to a middle split, because some of us won't be able to get to a full middle split because of the anatomy of our hips. So when you see it from here, I hope you can see it, my split is actually not flat. So it actually is on a bit of an angle, so it goes a little bit like this. And the reason for it is because I actually can't split fully through the middle because I just feel it pinch in my hips. So what I do is I do these small cheats. So I either arch, my knees go to the front, or I will round. When I stretch on the ground with my arms on the ground, I would round my back and just allow my hips to sit back a little bit. And this allows me to stretch my over splits for my middles, because otherwise I would probably never be able to get into that perfect middle split shape. It is a little bit hard to find the exact alignment that you need to be in. Just try to arch, move your hips back and forth, try to round, sitting back, moving your hips back and forth, just so you find whatever works for your anatomy. This is what works best for my anatomy, and I know that some of my students do the same thing and it works very well for them. So just try different variations of the two I have given you, and I'm sure you're gonna get deeper into your splits in no time. Thank you so much for watching. This is all I had for us today. I hope this was useful. If it helped you in any kind of way, please consider subscribing to my channel, because it really helps my mission here and it allows me to invest more time into making videos for you guys. Thank you so much.